Internal family systems, inner child healing, and archetypal psychology are three different perspectives on parts work, and they need something very particular to hold them together. You might have noticed that it's very trendy to talk about ego death or ego transcendence, but I've learned that actually this is a great misunderstanding when it comes to the healing journey. The adult ego is a necessary, foundational, and empowering central point for anybody who's interested in the parts work process. And today we're going to be taking a look at the often misunderstood territory of strengthening your ego, especially as it relates to coming into contact with the inner child, or maybe the Jungian archetypes, or maybe even any particular subpersonality that you might be trying to have a dialogue with, or an active imagination, or any kind of integration process. This is going to be an advanced level conversation, troubleshooting one of the common sticking points or stagnation points that I tend to find with clients and with people who ask questions like today's questioner. So let's bring it up on the screen. Great question. It's again a bit more of a sophisticated, it's not an introductory video. If you're already familiar with inner child healing and archetypes, this is probably the video for you. If it's your first video hearing these phrases, please go to my channel and look for the same phrases elsewhere. This is more an advanced video. Let's get into it. Question today. I find when I try to do parts work, I encounter so many different competing and contradictory parts that keep popping up as I try to work with one. I never get the kind of clarity and vision that you seem to have gotten, and most of the time my parts won't really give me responses, and then at some point my whole system just reaches an impasse and collapses and I just go dead. Key sentence. And I can't get to the bottom of if a gut feeling I have about something is my inner knowing or just a part. It feels perhaps I don't have a strong enough ego to really do this work. Wondering if you can perhaps speak about these things a bit. Well, yes, we're doing this video because this is a sophisticated question which I see a lot behind the scenes. There's this moment where you're familiar, let's say, with the inner child. You've been reading books like Healing the Child Within by Charles Whitfield. You've contacted your inner toddler, your inner 7-year-old, your inner 10-year-old, and your inner adolescent, and you're starting to build out this council of internal experiences, internal advisors. If you're doing an internal family systems model, you're coming into contact with the exiles. And then what happens when it starts to get a little bit too much? What happens when you're sat in imagination? Maybe you've read a book like Embracing Ourselves by Hal and Sidra Stone. You're in the voice dialogue process. You're already familiar with how to bring up these imaginal conversations, or maybe even active imagination is something that you go into quite frequently. Fantastic. But what happens when everyone starts blurring together? What happens when you go into the citadel of your heart? You sit down at that round table like King Arthur with his wonderful gallant knights, and all of the inner children, all of the archetypes, and all of the subpersonalities, and also the shadowy figures all seem to crowd around, and it feels like you're being shouted at from every direction. How do you work with so much energy at once? How do you blend the past and the future, the possibilities and the repressions, in a way where you can actually gain clarity? Today's questioner said that I seem to have gained some form of clarity and some form of discernment that they can't seem to access. Well, let's dive straight in and try and figure out how to unravel it. There's a few things I can suggest, very practical suggestions. But every single suggestion needs to be built on the foundation of having a healthy, mature, adult ego, which is different from a persona or a false self. The healthy, mature, adult ego is a sense of being your name. I am Jordan. This is my work. These are my relationships. This is where I live. This is the country I'm from. This is my race. This is my sexual orientation. It's solid. It's stable. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and think that I'm a woman. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and believe I'm an American. And tomorrow I'm also not going to believe that I have a job welding down at the factory. There's so many elements of my identity which are consistent and fixed. Not to say that they'll never change. Maybe I do become a welder further into the future, but certain things definitely are fixed. I'm not going to be changing my idea of who I am at the core, at the biological level, or even my name anytime soon. I have a healthy, mature, stable, adult ego, because the weak or ineffectual ego, or the ego which is shifting between different identities on a seemingly weekly basis, or maybe a slower term, multiple months, you believe that you are indeed a certain type of character, you're an artistic type, so then you put on a stylish, flashy zebra shirt and a strange-looking Birmingham 1920s flat cap and show up on camera, and you're all, ooh, like this. But then, a few months later, you realize actually you're the corporate type and you show up in a black suit and you don't wear any silly hats, and then just a few weeks later, you're the sporty type. That's not an ego. That's a bit more of an expressive quality, and of course we can be fluid, we can mix around with fashion, but the important distinction between a healthy, mature ego and a bit of a persona or a false self is when you're taking on the superficial character elements at the detriment of just realizing that there is such a thing as a healthy, reliable, more or less stable, more or less solid central identity. I do believe on a daily basis that I am going to continue to wake up to be a straight, white man named Jordan who makes YouTube videos and does certain types of client work and has certain relationships with people in my life who are stable and reliable, and they appear as consistent characters. I'm not confused about my gender identity. I'm not confused about my sexual orientation. I didn't have to do any particular work in regards to this because I know that I'm a man, I'm definitely not a woman, but even people who I've worked with who are gay or lesbian, when they get to the point where they've accepted their core sexual orientation and they feel that strength of, I am indeed a gay man or a lesbian woman, that forms the healthy, robust ego. There's a bit of a process to get towards that point, but that is a healthy ego which shouldn't be questioned if you know that that's your core. The difficulty is if you don't have that identity. If I didn't know that I was a straight white man, and if a certain client or a certain person didn't know that they were a gay white woman or a gay black man or whatever the basic construct is, they might go into the archetypal reality or the parts work reality or the inner child space, and they encounter a child within or an archetype beyond that gives them mixed information. They might encounter a certain archetypal figure which appears as the opposite gender, the opposite orientation, and a completely different direction in life, and they might be so enamored by the process of, I contacted something and I don't know what it is, let's call it my soul, let's call it my true self. They contact an archetypal image. Let's make it real. Let's imagine I go into my inner world and I contact a figure which appears symbolically as a lesbian black woman. That's what I see symbolically. I can relate to this figure symbolically, psychologically, and learn from this figure without collapsing my identity to believe that at my core I am a lesbian black woman. It's a silly example to some degree because of course it seems like an oversimplification, but I'm trying to illustrate a point that when it comes to parts work, you don't overly identify with any part that you encounter in the same way that it would clearly not be the right fit if I was trying to appropriate or fixate or play some kind of gender swapping game with an imaginal part that I just contacted through a dream. That psychological instability is something which also creates mental instability and can often lead people to getting overwhelmed when they get into parts work. Today's questioner said they contact so many different voices, so many different individual, identifiable but not fully identifiable parts that they become overwhelmed and their whole system goes dead. They were given too many options at once, and isn't it interesting at this particular moment in society just how many options we seem to be given to be able to change our identity or even our gender on a daily basis. I don't think it's a recipe for mental health. There's many different ways to express, there's many different ways to put yourself out into the world, but there needs to be certain things which are solid. There needs to be a healthy, mature, adult ego which can take in the new information, especially if you're dealing with trauma, especially if you're an adult who's looking back at a difficult childhood and you're trying to integrate the fantasies of the abandoned, abused, inner child. You can sit with them again at the round table. You can identify and hold that this is the part of me, to the best of my awareness. I don't know for sure. I think this is a younger part of me, maybe about 5 or 6, that fantasy that I had in my mind to suddenly pretend I'm something that I'm not. That kind of feels like an inner 6-year-old who wants to play pretend because they want to play, or they want an escape from reality, or maybe in a more dark scenario, maybe it's the inner boy inside of me that had a moment where my father shunned me for being a boy, or my mother didn't like me for being a boy and made a comment like, "Oh, I wish you were more like Sally's daughter next door." And she made that as an offhand remark, and in my 5-year-old, 6-year-old brain, I thought, maybe I would be better off if I was a girl. It's child's thinking. It's a very triggering, sensitive space. I've gone with this particular example because that's something which is very culturally relevant and strong right now. But we need to identify where certain fantasies, certain obsessions, and certain ideas might come from, in the same way that if we're going to go all the way deep into archetypal reality, maybe we start reading about Jungian depth psychology. We don't get spiritually grandiose and inflated to believe that we are kings and queens and goddesses and gods. We don't take the 5-year-old seriously when they're being playful, or they put on the outfit and say, "Look at me, I truly am Super Mario," or whatever they might be playing, in the same way that when we go into archetypal reality, we don't contact the ancient Sumerian goddess figure in our dream and then believe instantly, abandoning our strong adult ego, that we are actually the incarnation of an ancient goddess. It's too quick, it's too soon, it's unbalanced. It's not going to lead you to a mentally healthy place. There's a difference between identifying and fixating on the parts and the archetypes that come in, as opposed to being the healthy, mature ego, having a fixed identity to at least enough of a degree of rigidity. I still understand that I'm Jordan and I have a certain life, so when I go into my imaginal space, I can feel like I'm sat at that round table and I can identify that I remain here and the parts remain there, and it feels like something which is tangible, not something which is overwhelming. There's not too many voices shouting in my ear for control. I can identify based on identity, morals, values, principles, and also biological reality that I am indeed a certain number of things which are not up for debate. And when I know that, I can contact the wishful inner child who's got pain and trauma and all kinds of escape mechanisms, maybe anxious avoidant or anxious over-attachment, or maybe in a romantic sense, the 10-year-old within who got rejected by his first crush. And I can realize, wow, that part of me that really overgives to all my female partners, I think that sounds a lot like how I sounded when I was 10 years old. And you can catch a moment where you remember something that happened on the playground, where when you got rejected by the girl, you decided that very same day, when playtime came around, to build a bouquet of flowers or like really try and tie them together, but you're not very good. And you went over and gave it to the girl, and she giggled and she laughed at you, and then all the girls pointed at you, and you had that trauma-bound memory of not only do you need to be more impressive, not only are you not good enough, but also this strange mixture of codependency about overgiving and being rejected and wanting to give but being fearful. It might not fit you as a 20, 30 or 40-something. It's an old story, but we can see the old story from a parts work-based perspective when we have a central point which is not up for debate. If you really want to go into out there psychic territory, if you want to go into the spiritual deep end with esoterics and occult and spiritual insanity at times, there's so much new information that you are risking some very tricky psychological inflations. You better have a tether back to daily reality, close relationships, a meaningful career, or at least stable work, an identity which isn't moving, a sexuality which you've worked through, whatever that may be, straight or gay. It's wonderful, but make sure you know what that is, so that you can have a central point that isn't swayed by information within, and if you want to make it more culturally appropriate, you're not consumed by the information that you see online and things that are presented to you as being an option at any given point you can just change on a whim. It might not be true. I don't think it is true, is the honest answer. You're an individual, and you have many forms of expression. You may have worn a few false self-personas in the past, and you may have a few masks which you need to peel off. Maybe I, as Jordan, am a certain level of truth, and there's a layer of Jordanness which is fake and a persona. And through parts work, I pull that off, and then I get a little bit closer, and I pull that off, and again, I get to something like a true self energy. If we want to go into internal family systems, which is an incredible model for this, we've got somatic internal family systems therapy. I'll put it up here. That's very much a body-based approach. And if you want to go for the classic book, which I truly recommend you read, Internal Family Systems Therapy, get the second edition. Hopefully that comes up on the screen, by Richard Schwartz. You're going to learn how to work with your firefighters, your exiles, and your managers, and it's very much for you to go into at your own pace, but just try and maintain that sense of solidity while going into dissolving space. You are the central decision maker. You are the healthy self energy. You are the mature adult ego that goes into spiritually exciting, enamoring space or deeply wounded inner child space without being swayed off center or believing things which are only half true. And it applies culturally as well. Making a bit of a strong point on this video. First time on the channel I've gone this strong on some of these points, but I see the psychological mental health aspects, and I see the links towards dissociation. I see the links towards people being very distressed when they're coming into contact with way too much energy and not knowing what to do with that because there's so much conflicting information, and it really worries me. I don't think it's a way that we can maintain truly healthy, truly self-loving, reliable, safe, secure identity if certain things are being up for debate and we've got so much confusion and so much intensity on the outside and the inside. It's no wonder that we're swayed strongly in certain emotional directions. Something like parts work, if you really want to bring it all together, something like parts work will allow you to really develop a healthy sense of integrity, a healthy sense of morality, and a healthy feeling that you know who you are. You know what you believe in, you know what you like and what you don't like, and you can have a healthy blend between boundaries and standards without being shamed or guilted to believing that you need to accept everything or that your reality might be up for debate. If you want to take it really to an extreme perspective, I don't know how I feel about this, but let's put it out there. A really extreme perspective on what parts work can do for you. You won't be suckered. And you won't be pulled into narratives where potentially you're almost gaslit into doubting your own reality. Stories and narratives out there, challenging truths, challenging biological realities. Be aware of what the inner child might be saying, and the story is that those traumatized children living in their adult bodies might be saying, and be aware of where archetypal spiritual realities might be overlaying in a way which leads humans to being in very unstable and often very scary spaces. It's no joke when the dark night of the soul hits and you believe that you've got a past life full of torture and terror and punishing combative energy. That person who believes that too strongly and fixates on that idea too strongly does not become a healthy person. And I've seen people really off the deep end take their lives, and also clients that I've worked with who've accessed too much too soon, having to pull them back, grounding them into an earthy lifestyle with their 2 feet on the floor, going to the gym, doing the yoga, eating consistently, getting off the substances, strong, stable, reliable adult identity. And then we go into all of the spaces which are shadowy and unknown. But don't skip this step. If you feel like parts work is overwhelming, and if you feel like society at large is a bit overwhelming and there's so much information from all the perspectives, pull it back, focus on what's here, look yourself in the mirror, form a relationship with your body, your flesh and your blood, and learn to love yourself so passionately and deeply from the inside out that you can start to bring in new information which would be challenging or upsetting without becoming so confronted that you drown in all of that psychic density. A mixed video here, maybe not what you expected when you clicked on the video at first, but I can't bring up all these books and go into this space without having that moment where very naturally I see where the inner becomes the outer, and how what we're seeing on a global stage right now is truly reflected in terms of some of the internal chaos that most of us are experiencing. You know when you meet someone who's solid and someone who's flexible at the same time, that paradoxical space between they know who they are, but they don't take it too seriously. And I'd like to meet more people like that, rather than overblown, aggressive, exaggerated, attacking other people kind of characters, or otherwise being so fragile and vulnerable and so indecisive about their identity that either they shrink away or, again, need to attack other people to affirm, you call me this or else kind of energy. Doesn't indicate healthy integration. But I hope that with a video like this and with these books, if you start to notice that you're in that territory, you can bring it all back down, because I know what it feels like to go way too into psychic possibilities and believe one thing or another and shift way too quickly, and I wasn't very mentally healthy when I was in that space. I hope this helps. Let me know what came up for you in the comments section. I hope this was a discussion, and I look forward to seeing the discussions that come up right down there. And I'll see you over here on the next one, where we're going to do more trauma therapy and more, hopefully, enlightening and engaging conversational depth. I'll see you there.